Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. My name is Marie Ann, and I am your worship associate today. Our Social Justice Council will be presenting our service today. If you would join me in saying these words as Teresa lights our chalice. We light this chalice with the embers of compassion. We light this chalice with the torch of justice. We light this chalice with the radiance of joy. And now Susan will do the story for all ages.
Okay. So our story today has to do with the UU 7th principle. Zephron, you want to tell us what that is? Can you say it nice and loud?
We value our interdependence with nature.
We value our interdependence with nature. Today you're going to hear a lot about climate change, but we're going to start off by looking at other changes that people have made to the earth and some of that impact. Okay, so our story today is called Parachuting Cats to the Rescue. And this is a true story. And for all you keiki, this is an old story because it's happened even before your parents were born. I don't think any of you have parents old enough for when this happened, which was in the 1950s. And our story takes place in Borneo. So kids, if you look at your little globes here, Borneo has a little orange dot on it, and Hawaii is in red. So you can see where Borneo is compared to Hawaii. So our story starts out in the 1950s, and there were lots of mosquitoes in Borneo. And unlike the mosquitoes in Hawaii, the ones in Borneo carried a disease called malaria. So what do you think happened when people got bit by mosquitoes carrying malaria? Yes. They got sick, that's right. And malaria is such a serious disease that many people die from malaria. So scientists decided they needed to find some way to help the people in Borneo. And so something called the World Health Organization decided that they were going to spray DDT to eradicate the mosquitoes, to get rid of them. Now, DDT, has anybody heard of that? That's a serious poison, okay? And so they sprayed the mosquitoes, and sure enough, it worked. However, it had more consequences than they realized. So the mosquitoes died, and the people stopped dying from malaria, which was a good thing. And everybody thought, oh, well, this was a good thing for us to do. But then they realized, oh my gosh, other insects were dying too from this poison. And those insects included wasps. And everybody, of course, doesn't want to get stung by a wasp, but wasps have important function, and they keep down the grasshopper population. And so when the wasps started to die from this poison, there were more and more grasshoppers. And what do grasshoppers eat? Plants, that's right. And the people in Borneo, their houses, their roofs are made of grass. And so there was more and more grasshoppers, and they started eating the roofs of people's houses. And their roofs collapsed. So people said, oh, well, that's not a good thing. And they looked around, and they saw that not only were the wasps dying and the mosquitoes, but also they discovered that there were other insects that were getting ill and dying too. And some of them were being eaten by geckos. Does anybody know what a gecko is? Yeah, what's a gecko? It's like a lizard, that's right. Now, geckos eat cockroaches and other insects, and so the geckos started to die. And people looked around and said, oh my gosh, what do we have here that eat geckos? And it turned out that one of the things that happens is rats eat geckos. But the rats weren't dying, but the cats eat geckos, and the cats were dying. So there weren't enough cats soon to keep all the gecko population down and the rat population down. And so they said, oh my gosh, what do we do now? So they went out into all the villages in the countryside to see if they could find more cats. But they couldn't find enough cats to keep the rats population down. And people started to worry because rats carry the plague. So they're like, oh my gosh, we started this whole chain of events, and they've had one bad consequence after another. What can we do that might fix the problem? So what animal do you think eats rats? Cats. So they thought, okay, cats must be our solution. And since they didn't have enough cats, the members of the British Royal Air Force decided to fly in cats. And they got their helicopters, and they got their cats, and they put little parachutes on their cats, and they dropped 20 cats into Borneo to help get rid of the rat problem, so they could help get rid of the disease problem. So the moral of our story is, remember our 7th UU principle, everything is interconnected. So we need to respect that interdependence of life and be careful and thoughtful about the things that we do to our earth and to our Aina. Okay, the end.
Yay. And with that, let's make a bridge and sing them off to their program. Go now in peace, may the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace, may the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Morligan, and I represent the Social Justice Council as the worship coordinator for today. We gather today in this sanctuary of our sacred principles and our beloved community to affirm our commitment to protecting our Aina, the planet Earth, and to the interconnected web of all existence of which we are a part. Today we focus on climate change and the daunting challenges to global, national, and local Aina, which impel us forward to bold action for bold change. Please join us now with open hearts and minds in heralds of changes ahead. Our responsive reading, please respond to my introductions. Earth Aina abides in sacred creation, cradling life's unimaginable oneness. Let us commune body, mind, and emotions with the earth, shifting our inner and outer worlds. Let us connect spirit now with radical intentions, forging protection for this wondrous web of life. Let us unite here and around the world in intention, joining hearts, minds, and actions in hard choices. Let us commit to the most difficult task of all, transforming ourselves, the result of achieving justice for all life on earth. Today we have a dual sermon. Our first speaker will be our own UU congregation person, Mike Model, Dr. Mike Model. And our second speaker will be Dr. Chuck Burrows, here from the Church of the Crossroads, who has been named in 2008 a Hawaii's Living Treasure. Please welcome Mike.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mike Model. I'm a long-standing member of this congregation. I'm also a geologist. I have a PhD from Harvard, 1976. My specialty is geochemistry. And geochemistry, as it turns out, is sort of the heart and soul, really the driving force of much of what's going on with climate change. Over the last 35 years or so, however, I have been doing oceanography, and I currently am chair of the Department of Oceanography at the University of Hawaii. One of the courses that I teach, I just started teaching it again last week, is called Global Environmental Change. And that's, of course, part of what I'll be talking about this morning. So what I want to do in the next 10 minutes is to give you an idea, first of all, what's happening. Secondly, why it's happening, who's responsible for it, what the consequences are, and finally, what we've tried and maybe hasn't worked, but what we need to do going forward into the future. And this won't be a science talk, in spite of what you see there on the slide. I really want to talk about ethics and morality, because there are very serious issues involved around climate change that are ethical in nature. And also I want to point the direction toward what we need to do as a society in order to solve this problem. But let's start with this. What's happening? What's happening is, of course, we are putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in amounts that have significantly warmed our climate beyond the natural effect, which is, of course, desirable. And what you're looking there at on that graph is the famous Keeling curve, initiated in 1957 by Dr. Charles David Keeling of Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Those measurements were made then and continue to be made today here in Hawaii on the slopes of Mauna Loa at the Mauna Loa Observatory. I was actually out there last January. And what you see is that in 1957, the CO2 was much lower than it is now, and that graph continues to increase with time as we move forward. And in fact, just earlier this year, we reached 400 parts per million for the first time. And that contrasts with the natural concentration pre-industrial of about 280 parts per million. That's a very large change from 280 to 400. And it has had a very significant effect already in warming our climate. That's not desirable. A certain amount of warming is great, but we're doing it excessively at this point. And a way you can think about this, our current energy imbalance from these excess greenhouse gas is about 1 to 2 watts per square meter of the surface of the Earth. And a way to think about that, if you look, imagine those little Christmas tree bulbs that all of us have used for years to light our trees. Those give out about 1 watt. And so imagine a mesh over the whole surface of the Earth, land and oceans both, with 1 or 2 of those Christmas tree bulbs locked in it for every square meter of the Earth's surface. That's about how much heat we're adding by this anthropogenic effect from burning of fossil fuels. And that's not good. And in fact, it's been predicted that within a few decades in this century, there will be substantial parts of the land surface of the Earth that will no longer be habitable by humans. It will simply have become too hot for us to survive. Now you see in that graph as well, there's little ticks up and down. Each year there's a seasonal cycle. It goes up, it goes back down, and we have this wavy fashion as the graph moves upward to the right. And what that is it's what we call the breathing of the northern hemisphere. Now today on Earth, most of the land is in the northern hemisphere, therefore most of the plants grow there, and these plants have a natural seasonal cycle in which in the springtime they grow, they take CO2 out of the atmosphere to make their tissues, leaves and so on, and then in the following fall those leaves fall, they decay, and the CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. So that's a very natural process seasonally up and down. But you can see what we have superimposed upon that is this large trend of increase, mainly due to the burning of fossil fuels. So that's what's happening. Why is it happening? It's happening because we burn coal, oil, and gas, natural gas, in order to fuel our industrial civilization. And what you're looking at in this plot is a series of curves for each of those different energy sources, coal, oil, natural gas, and that black line at the top that shoots upward very rapidly, beginning about 1950, is the sum of the burning of the emissions from all those fossil fuel sources. This phenomenon of anthropogenically induced climate change is largely an effect that's began in earnest in 1950. And you can see it's been going up very rapidly since that time. So this is a relatively recent phenomenon. And there I note for you, the world since 1950 has been different from any other period in human history, so different that we can call it the energy age. Now, this plot shows the intimate relationship between the use of that energy to drive our civilization and the size of the human population itself. And you can see that after a little bit of a lag at the beginning, energy caught up, and has tracked the growth of the population very closely since that time. And you all know our human population is growing very rapidly. I just looked at this last week for teaching my course. It turns out that in my lifetime, I was born in 1948, 4 years from now, when I hit 70, the human population will have tripled in my lifetime. There are already people here in this room for whom that is the case. The human population has tripled in their lifetimes. This is a staggering phenomenon that obviously cannot go on in that fashion for very long. And you can see from this graph there's an intimate relationship between the rate of that population growth and the energy use. And it's a cause and effect in both ways. The population has grown because the energy is available, and the energy use has grown because the population is larger than it was. Who's responsible? Well, in fact, anyone who uses fossil fuels, and that's virtually all of us, is in fact responsible for this. The solution is to stop burning fossil fuels. And here's a curious phenomenon. We always think of the US as leading everything, but in fact, in virtually every way to measure this, US is number 2 in this regard. Up until 2009, we were the leading emitters, but we were surpassed by China in 2009 because in the first decade of this century, China tripled their coal production and consumption. And that was the key to the so-called China miracle, and that caused them in 2009 to surpass us as the leading emitters of CO2 and greenhouse gas in the world. So we're number 2 at the present time. If you look at this on a per capita basis, we're still number 2, because now, even though China has many more people and is way down, Australia actually uses more energy per capita than we do. Once again, we're number 2. If you look at it historically, since the beginning of the industrial age, once again, we're number 2, because here now we're surpassed by the United Kingdom. Of course, they started burning coal earlier than anybody else. So maybe it's because we're trying harder, I'm not sure, but we're pretty consistently number 2 in this competition, if you will. What are the consequences? I think you all know this. You've all heard these things many times. The Earth is warming, alarmingly so, especially at the high latitudes in the polar regions. One result will be sea level is rising. And in fact, between the decade of the 1990s and the decade of the aughts, the 2000s, the rate of sea level rise tripled. And it continues to accelerate. And we can expect in this century 1 to 2 meters of sea level rise. That will be devastating to coastal cities and coastal areas. What people don't seem to realize is it's not going to stop in 2100. Given that we now are pretty sure that the West Antarctic ice sheet is in a state of irreversible collapse, this sea level rise will continue and accelerate, and it's probably the case that we can already, for example, write off the island of Manhattan. It's going underwater, deep enough that we won't be able to wall it off. The only question is how soon that will happen. Most likely guess a few centuries into the future. So we've set something loose that will not be easy to stop. What else do we get? Increase in extreme weather events, including floods and drought. And drought in particular is obviously devastating to agriculture and threatens our ability to feed the 7 billion plus humans. Change in precipitation patterns, ocean acidification. CO2 is a mild acid when it dissolves in water, and it is acidifying the oceans. And then, of course, species extinctions resulting from the combination of all of these things. What are the ethical considerations? We have a number of transfers of resources and wealth from the rich to the poor, for example. So developed countries are responsible for about 77% of the global warming to date. And yet, as always, it will be the poor countries that will pay the heaviest price, that will be the least able to adapt to these changes. At the same time, we've had a massive transfer from the old to the young in terms of responsibility. Our generation, my generation, remember this started about 1950, will be has benefited the most from burning these fossil fuels, but it will be our children and our grandchildren who will pay the heaviest price. What hasn't worked? What have we tried so far that hasn't been very effective? Well, for starters, there's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was an attempt beginning in 1992 to get concerted action from the world's nations to do something about this very severe problem. So far, they've had a whole series of meetings. The latest several have been pretty much colossal failures. The next one will happen in about 3 weeks, beginning September 17th in New York City. The nations of the world will once again meet. And environmentalists have planned what they expect to be the largest climate change demonstrations ever in history. So lots of people are going to New York City for that event. This whole situation is full of irony. So for example, the first of these conventions to have real teeth was the famous Kyoto Protocol of 1997, which committed the signatories to lower their greenhouse gases below 1990 levels. 196 nations signed on to that. There was one that didn't. Guess who it was? That's right, it was us. But now, 15 years later, there's really only been one major country that's met the targets set by the Kyoto Protocol. Once again, it was us. How did we do that? How did we do that? We did it because of fracking, because of the sudden abundance of natural gas at less expensive prices that has caused natural gas to replace coal in producing a lot of our electricity way faster than anybody thought was possible. And since you get only about half of the greenhouse gas from burning natural gas as you do from coal, that's cut our emissions way back. Again, full of irony. Bottom line, in terms of what we've tried to date, it's too little, too late. This is a major global problem that will require large and concerted action on the part of the world. So what can we do? Well, there's an old saw in the environmental community that says, think globally, act locally. And you will see that this morning. I'm the global part. Chuck will be the local part. But here I must note, this is a big problem. It's intimately tied with our energy use that drives our civilization. This will not be easy to do. And simply changing your light bulbs is not going to solve this problem. What could? The single biggest thing we could do is to impose a carbon tax. Because, in effect, what we've been doing is we've been dumping this material, the greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere for free, no charge. It's the only free dump left on the planet. Dump it into the atmosphere, no charge. We need to change that, and that's what a carbon tax would represent. The carbon is best left in the ground, especially the coal and the tar sands, the dirtiest sources of energy. Just leave it in the ground. Use something else to generate the energy. Support renewable energy. Get solar hot water. Put photovoltaics on your roof. Drive an electric car, as my lovely wife did this morning. Ours is sitting there outside in the parking lot. Oppose an all-of-the-above energy strategy. I know that's what Obama has championed, and he's a tricky guy. He's got his own plans underneath the surface. But in fact, all of the above will not work because it continues to encourage the recovery of coal and oil and other natural carbon-based fuels. And we should not favor that. It will aggravate the problem over the long haul. Oppose subsidies for fossil fuels. We're still subsidizing them more than we're subsidizing renewable energy at this date, this late date. The Keystone XL pipeline, we should be against that. It will be a disaster if it goes forward. We need to support the Climate Change March in New York City in September, which is, as I said, coincident with the next meeting of the UN Framework Convention. So that's the message I have for you this morning. I hope you see what you can do, and let's all do what we can to make this happen. Thank you.
Aloha mai kako, aloha to all of you. And thank you, Mike, for what you were talking about, that it's important that we look at the moral and ethical parameters of global warming. As Al Gore, in his Inconvenient Truth film, said that it's no longer an environmental issue, it's no longer a political or economic issue, it is now a moral issue. And the moral issue lies with us in the religious community, religious as well as the indigenous community, which I'll be talking about. I would like to start off with an Oli Kahea. I grew up here in Nu'uanu and also in Kailua. and my grandfolks used to travel from here. This goes back to the 30s and 40s, from here to from Nuuanu to Kailua. And so this is the areas that I've always been involved with. I've also been involved with Kainui Marsh, working with the Hawaiian organizations, the Hawaiian Civic Clubs, particularly the Kailua Hawaiian Civic Club, and an environmental and cultural organization called Ahahui Malama Ikalokahi, a group that cares, for the ecosystems, not only here in Hawaii, but throughout the world. So this kahea that I will offer to you speaks of Kainui Marsh, about the life forms of Kainui Marsh, the plants and the animals, and especially Hauwahine. Hauwahine is our legendary spiritual guardian, a huge mo'o, reptilian-like creature. And she commanded our people of the past to care for Kainui and the Ahu Pawa'a of Kailua. Aleale kaleo kalai, he mapuna leo polo a ikalai, he pule kanainai upo, upo lai ulamabau, kakali kaleki ikanihi, kanioka wahini pai, kenihi kaheline, kenihi kaheline, maheia. Easier for me to look, not only slide up, but here as well. So my talk is about the Hawaiian kinship. That's important. Religiously, whether it's Christian or Judo, it's about the stewardship, meaning being a steward, caring for the Lord's or God's vineyard. With the Hawaiian and other indigenous perspective, it is caring for the family, the kinship relationship to the earth as well. So we start off with the Kumulipo. The Kumulipo, which is the Hawaiian hymn of creation, is similar to the Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, as to how life began and evolved from the simplest to the most complex. So it is with the Kumulipo, starting with the coral polyp, going through all forms of life, other animals, and then ending with the human life. And with the human life, it also pertains to the ali'i, the rulers who had the most mana, and also the common people, the Kanaka Maoli. So in the creation chapter, I'd say it was very similar, tying in the life that exists with the native peoples. Also in the story of Haloa, when the Earth Mother, Papa, and the Sky Father, Waikea, give birth to the first human being, that firstborn dies. And then the second birth evolves. But what happens is that it is a plant, and it happens to be the kalo, or the taro plant, which is named Haloa. And then from Haloa, who was the originator of the Hawaiian people, that is the ancestor. So Hawaiians still today care for their elder brother, Haloa, the taro plant, and all of the rest of life. So that is that kinship relationship of the past. And of course, with the Hawaiians, the cultural traditions, whether it's in voyaging, whether it's in the oli, craftsmanship of what they were able to use from the plants and animal life, and also their rules and conservation, and the release of those rules pertains to the identity of the Hawaiian people. They, as a Hawaiian people, evolved from the Aina, from the earth, from the Hawaiian Islands as it existed at that particular time. And if we don't have these plants and animals and various cultural sites existing, then we lose the identity as to who we are as Hawaiians. So this is another reason for the caring for the sacred places and the environment in Aina that exists today. The various life forms, for instance, whether it's plants and animals, which we call our amakua. Our amakua, our ancestral deities associated with the various animals or plant life forms. The kino lao, which is the representative of the gods, whether it's Kani or Lono, are very important factors. Then with the Hawaiian conservation, this is where it gets into the ethical values, which is very important. Because, the kinds of things that you're doing, why are you guided? You're guided by the major principles or concepts. So the concepts of mana, the energizing force that permeates throughout the universe and onto Earth itself and onto all life forms, is so important. So on Earth, we have creatures, animals, or human beings that may have greater mana, some less, but they are still important. And of course, the understanding of the sacred and the profane, or the kapu and the noa, is very important, because this is how they were able to regulate, they were able to conduct, their affairs, their works, and their traditions within the places where they live. Ike, knowledge, very, very important here. It's amazing how these voyagers, Hokulea is on a voyaging mission there, coming to islands like this here, or even islands less than Hawaiian Islands, like atolls, have less resources, but what were they able to do was to utilize those resources so that they could survive as far as their health was concerned, food was concerned, but not only that, but be able to use the resources to create the type of civilization that they had at that particular time. In fact, the Hawaiian Islands, Hawaiian people, compared to other Pacific Islanders, had evolved, whether it was the growing of taro, of the craftsmanship, woodwork, and so forth, to a higher degree, topple making, feather making, etc., than any other Pacific Island group. And this is the knowledge that had enabled them to survive. And we would like to use this type of a process, this type of a knowledge, to adapt to climate change by understanding how the Polynesians, Indonesians, I can mix up right now. You say it for me. Indigenous were able to do it. Okay. The concept of the living Earth is very important. That the Earth, planet Earth, is not the same as Mars or Saturn, Pluto or Venus, but the only planet in this solar system that we know of, through the biological, through the chemical processes, is able to evolve this life here. So this, in a sense, become a very, very sacred planet, a very, very sacred Earth. In fact, the word Aina means that which to feed, portraying the earth as a mother feeding her young, Aina. And if we not able to protect, this living earth there, we'll have a dead planet, as Mars is today. And of course, the Malama, caring for the stewardship, is very important. But I said, we're taking it not only of being good stewards as through the Lord's creation, but being what stewards in the sense of having an understanding that we are all part of that web of life that we speak of, you know. And so even in the understanding of the DNA as well, we are related not only among ourselves as human beings, with other animals, but with all plants and all living forms as well. Okay, so sunrise and Olamana. When the Hawaiians first came to this area of the Windward Side, they planted the kalo, sugarcane, sweet potatoes especially. So this is what we see today of Kawainui Marsh. One part of it extends further inland, and it is the largest wetlands that we have here in the Hawaiian Islands. And of course, when geologically, maybe 10 million years ago, this was an inland ocean bay. When the Hawaiians came here 1,000 years ago, this was a lagoon. And what they did then was to convert at least 400 acres of this part of Kawainui that you see here into an inland fish pond. So the Hawaiians were practicing aquaculture 500, 800 years ago, and this was the largest inland fish pond at that time in the Hawaiian Islands. And using the waters and springs going up into Manavili Valley, they were able to grow the taro and other food crops. So this was a food basket of Kailua, along with Kaneohe and Waimanao, feeding a very large population. But in time when the Hawaiians were no longer able to care for the growing of the food crops, you have changes in the society, in the economics and so forth, and the decrease in the Hawaiian population. And then it changes from a subsistence economy to a plantation economy. And so changes comes about. So rice was growing here in Kawainui, as other places throughout the islands. In fact, even shipping rice to California. Today we get more rice from there than we can ship there. And then, but when rice is no longer profitable, then it's the raising of cattle. In fact, all Kailua, Kaneohe, and so forth was a huge cattle area. So you bring grasses in, cattle were raised in Kawainui, and that takes over the marsh. And so what you see there is a degraded ecosystem. But surrounding Kawainui are sacred sites such as Ulupo Heiau. So you can see sort of a rock outcrop there. That's Ulupo Heiau, surrounded by all alien vegetation. But Ulupo Heiau is Oahu's largest and oldest heiau or temple. And what we have been doing with volunteers, with other church groups, is to restore this particular area called ethnobotanical restoration, restoring the food plants that the Hawaiians brought with them to this particular site. And so you can see the clearing there and the planting that takes place. Ulupo, meaning night of inspiration. The function of that temple originally was a mapele, or an agricultural husbandry temple. Later in time, when we have a powerful ruling chief called Kuali'i, it changes to a war temple as he battles with the forces throughout the islands there. But then Ulupo Heiau has been rededicated as a mapele agricultural temple once again. So here at Ulupo Heiau, we have natural springs that's flowing for thousands of years, where taro and other plants have been planted, and we're doing the same again this time here, growing the food plants that once were there, and then working directly into the marsh by cutting back the alien invasive tall grasses that have taken over, and then restoring the waters below. What you see there are the women inmates work line from the Women Correctional Facility that come at least twice a month to Ulupo, twice a month to Napohaka Uhawahini, and take part in the caring for the Aina at this particular place here. And of course, we have, other volunteers from businesses and other organizations coming to clear the brush and to work in the wetlands and repairing these places. We also have Hawaiian families that come here to work in the Lo'i Kalo, the taro fields there. And whatever is grown here is given away to those who come and work. And we have work days, be the second Saturday of each month. So if this congregation here is interested in coming, and some of you have, to Kauai to other places, you're welcome to do so. We also had, in fact, this past July, a church group from Clovis, California, some about 20 youth there from a Japanese-American UCC church, and they came to Kauai, working with about maybe 15 of the Methodist youth at this particular spot. And what you see growing before you is sweet potato. In the background is dryland taro, and then further on back is the wetland bird habitat. And so, as I say, if you restore it, they will come. And these are the Hawaiian stilts, the ayo, that have come back to this particular part of Ulupo Heiau. Now, there's also a Department of Land and Natural Resources master plan for Kauai Nui. And this is in the news of lately, of those who oppose it and those who are for it. Those who are opposed it, particularly from the Kailua community, feeling that they had enough of tourists coming to their site there, and that we shouldn't, be sponsoring things that will attract more tourists to Kailua. And we all agreed with it, because I lived in Kailua going back to the 30s, in fact, living right next to Kailua Beach, where we had that beach all to ourselves throughout the day, throughout the week, and throughout the year. Well, now it's a different story. So that's another problem that to be dealt with in a different way. But we, as the Hawaiian organizations, such as the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs and other Hawaiian cultural and hula halal groups, would like to have a place in Kauai Nui. We don't have an official place to be there. We, as Hawaiians, did have a royal court called Pamoa in Kailua, where all these cultural practices that took place, genealogy, the observations of the constellations and voyaging and martial arts, at one time, but not anymore. We don't have a place in Kauai Nui. We'd like to have a presence in Kauai Nui, and that's the reason why there are sites proposed along the marsh where we could continue our cultural practices. Is adapting to climate change, by removing the alien species, by growing food once again, taro and other crops. And then it was predicted, this slide was given to Chip Fletcher. He gave me one showing a 3-foot rise before the end of the century, and areas where the salt water will come in through the streams and also in parts of Kauai Nui. But this is a 6-foot rise in this particular area before the end of the 2nd or 3rd centuries. Now, this is not going to happen in our lifetime, not in my lifetime there, but in our children's lifetime. And this is the reason why we all need to work together spiritually, religiously, and with indigenous peoples. Now, I will be going to Washington, D.C. In September 10th to the 12th. I was invited by the Alaskan Wilderness League to work with them, supporting the native peoples of Alaska, which I've done before, and to prevent the oil and resource exploitation of the Arctic Ocean and the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And we'll be going to various congressional offices, to enlist their support to prevent further global warming and adapting to climate change. So this is where all of you come in. So mahalo to all of you. There's hope at the end of the rainbow in Kauai Nui.